But what we're seeing now, obviously, there's a more heavy focus on psych and hazards in the workplace. Carly spoke about what is a mentally healthy workplace. A lot of employers would be starting from scratch in this space. What are some just basic quick tips that an employer to get what a mentally healthy workplace look like, but just some tips to get them started?
Yeah, I think probably the most cost-effective way is to use the data that you already have. We've spoken a lot about data today, and most organisations actually are really data rich, but it's about, with any kind of data, what do you then do with it that is going to be of benefit? And Matt and I were talking a little bit about that before, but I think being able to use the data that you already have, whether it is your EAP or your turnover rates, as you guys were talking about, digging deeper into your claims and understanding the why that sits behind a lot of that, and digging deeper into the surface, underneath the surface, is a really, really good place to start. So, as well as the expertise that you might already have within your workplace, like Simon mentioned before, there's a lot of people that their skills are underutilised. So go out and see, does somebody have an interest in this area? Do you have knowledge in this area? I can, use that as an example. Back at a previous employer, I had no experience in this space whatsoever, but was super interested in it, and ended up leading our mental health strategy as an organisation, and that just continued to snowball to kind of where I'm at now. And that came through a lot of reading and research and networking and upskilling myself. So, utilise people that you've already got within the organisation as well that might be able to benefit.
And I think one of the important parts to that is that we mustn't, as organisations, talk ourselves out of our ability to get this information. We look at these things and we look at the psychosocial issues and we worry about them more than we do physical injuries. But understand that it's exactly the same. Identifying the exposures, identifying risk, identifying hazard, identifying risk, identifying the information within our organisation is found in exactly the same way. We communicate with our people, we ask questions, we engage, we look, we listen, we can gather that information. We're very experienced, or we should be skilled. If we're managing our physical risk exposures, then we're just as capable of identifying psychosocial hazards. We're looking at slightly different things, but we're identifying them in the exact same way. It's through talking with our people, it's understanding, it's incident reports, it's investigating, interrogating the data that we have as a consequence. Hopefully we don't spend all of that time identifying our own information through interrogation of claims data. Hopefully we're getting some of it before it gets to that point. But we're looking at these issues in the same way. Don't be frightened by it.
I think Simon, I think to Jay's point too, that talking to your people is probably the most important part in terms of, an example I spoke about before with the vets. They go in knowing that they're going to have to euthanize animals, and that's going to be part of their job, right? But what they don't know is that they're going to have to be euthanizing animals that are well, because people can't afford the treatment. Okay, that's not a risk that they know is going to exist before they get into that job, but that is something that has the biggest impact on them, and they can tell you that information. So really great point there, Jay, I think.
And one of the reasons I had Carly come today is to talk about mentally healthy workplaces, to make you understand that as much as we're now focusing on these psychosocial hazards, people are bringing a lot of things into the workplace with them. And if we're not observing, if we're not watching our workers to see, geez, is someone having an issue? Then what is a personal issue that we probably could have helped them with, 9 out of 10 times will become a work-related issue with a claim. And we see that all the time. So, what we have to be doing is going well past, mental health first aid. I think it's one of the fads of the last 5 years, and I think it provides very little value. And there's some studies out there now actually saying that it doesn't provide a lot of value. Because how many people have you actually seen having a psychotic episode in your workplace? But how many people do you see come in who probably aren't looking great? Over the last couple of weeks, they've started to not shave or not care for themselves. They're withdrawn, they're a bit moodier. Because that's the stage where we can actually help people. When someone's having a critical episode, they need critical care. And it doesn't matter how well trained you are all you're going to do is literally put the Band-Aid on it, if that. But by that point, we've missed something, haven't we? If we've allowed someone to get to that point in our workplace, we've missed something along the way. Because there are signs that if we are engaging our people properly, going back to that team leader, if we're all looking out for each other, that we should be able to pick up and have a discussion with them. And as Jay often says to me, and don't just hand them an EAP card and say, here you go, call them, all right? Which I think, EAP I think is brilliant, but it should be used in a much more than a, well, if I give you this card, you'll go away and leave me alone sort of way.
Can I just add as well, and I hope I haven't put people off with all the discussion of measurement before, but I think there's an easy win here for leadership in that if you are going to roll out these surveys and you're telling your employees to fill it out, you need to follow up and actually take seriously their input. They've spent the time to fill out these surveys. They've given their views on what's working and what's not working. Actually just feeding that back to them and showing that you have a willingness to work with them and also to congratulate them on the things that are working well, being heard in that process will really engender a strong and positive environment and also a positive feeling towards the leadership group.
And as much as you all have to start looking at this, Andrew made a good point. Don't look at it, get information, then don't do anything with it, because that's going to be even worse for you than if you haven't looked at it. There has to be this willingness top down from an organisation to take this seriously and act. And Carly, how many organisations do you go into where some people have had a great idea, we'll get Carly and she'll help us with our mental, creating a mentally healthy workplace, but the buy-in up higher just isn't there?
Yeah, I'm currently working with an organisation that's 30,000 employees, so it's one of the biggest organisations nationally, and that's been a very backwards approach. There's had to be a lot of convincing done after the fact, and it's made it a lot harder to get any traction in terms of the implementation piece. And that's where, you don't want to be wasting your time. One, it's counterproductive to have your voice heard as a staff member and then go, I wonder whatever happened to that survey that was being done. Oh, great, they're just going to do nothing with it again. Okay, that's actually counterproductive. So what you want to see is that implementation and the, communication and consultation the whole way along. We've got the data, we've heard you, this is what we're doing now, this is what we're doing into the future. You definitely don't want to miss the boat from that perspective.
Who here gets all excited over Are You OK Day? Puts the banners up, sends an email out to the organisation. Today, are you OK? Come on, be honest. Yeah. What do you do the other 364 days of the year? So today we care. What I see a lot out there at the moment is a lot of tokenistic approaches to this that I don't think add any value. If we care 365 days a year, right? It's not one day we make a big fuss about it. We go, yeah, today I'm going to ask Josh how he feels. Because even on that day, if I don't care, if the business isn't geared that way, and I say, Josh, how are you going? And Josh says, I'm terrible today. Well, I didn't want that response because I now have this responsibility to engage with him. Because we've been taught our whole lives to ask people, how are you? And we've been taught our whole lives to say, I'm fine. Right? So unless we as an organisation go deeper than one day a year of, geez, do I actually care about you? And I don't, but it looks good if I put the posters up, to I actually care. And when someone asks a question of you, they want a real response. We're not going to move forward.
But it goes back also to, I think, the fact of when you do have a relationship and a rapport with your staff members, it makes those difficult conversations a lot easier. I'm not going to open up to somebody as my leader who never talks to me, is not interested in me, knows nothing about me as a person when I'm struggling. Okay, that's not going to happen. So you need to make sure that building rapport, building the relationships. My best manager that I've ever had, who I'm having lunch with after this actually today, we would spend the first probably 25 minutes of our weekly catch-up talking about the footy. Okay, and then there was about probably 2 minutes at the end where we'd go, have you done this? Yep, tick, 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 tick. I've done all that stuff. Okay, and we were lucky that we had 10 years of the same reporting line. So as he moved up, I moved up. That, helps build the relationship. But I can, and I'm happy to say this in front of the group, when I was really struggling with my mental health at one point during that, he was somebody that I spoke to because he was somebody that I spoke to a lot, okay? And I was really able to open up and trust that that information was safe, I was going to be supported at work, and that I wasn't going to be judged either. So we joke at my work that we could make so much money out of a how not to be a dickhead course for leaders, okay? But it's actually true. Like, it really is true. That is all you're doing, is you're teaching leaders, managers, etc., how not to be a dickhead to their staff, okay? And yeah, I'm going to trademark that now, but like, we joke about it, but that's what it, as simple as it is sometimes, and goes right back to Simon's point that he was making.
And I think one of the important issues around this, as Carly just said, the most significant people in this are the managers and the supervisors, right? We need to skill them. We need to skill them before we do anything else. As Simon raised, because I was just about to, because of course Simon said it. You know, we have this "Are you okay?" day, you know, and we go through this process, and you know, "Are you okay?" Well, someone says no. Well, then what do? You give them a muffin. You know, that's the sort of thing that doesn't really help in what we're trying to do. But we need to identify these things, and to channel Andrew from earlier, you know, where we need to have our processes in place. We need to identify these things, but then we need to do something about it, right? We need to actually actively change what we're doing and manage what we're doing. And we need to remain on this continuum, that we need to continually review these things. We need to continually identify what these issues are, and we need to continually adapt. Because I can tell you, the psychosocial hazards in 18 months' time are going to be very different to what they are today. And in 18 months after that, they're going to be very, very different again, right? Because people change, people have different views on things, society changes, and what impacts us is going to continually develop. So we don't just, it's not a blade on a machine, right? It's not a blade on a machine that we can guard. Psychosocial hazards are going to change. We need to stay on them, we need to monitor them, and we need to react as they change over time, or we're going to get caught out.
And everyone needs to understand that their businesses are all different. We've got a business on a sixth floor, and we always know when you're in with someone who works there, because they dress a certain way, and they're a call centre. Inbound, outbound, doing comparing insurance or one of those sort of things. Now, if you go back to what we were talking about before, low job control can be a psychosocial hazard. These people have very low job control. The phone just keeps ringing, and if it picks up, it connects them. Right? They've got a script that they go through, all these sort of things. But when that lift opens up on that floor, there's music blaring, there's their latest campaign they're doing, and and all these sort of things to support people and make it a healthy environment to work in, where they could just be dead silent, where everyone's just on the phone and there's no joy in the place, which would make that a significant issue. So it's how the solution to the hazards is going to be very specific to your organisation and how you go about doing that. You know, we talked, Carly, about isolated workers, and how does a manager engage with those people? How do they build a relationship like you had with your manager with someone who is in another country, with someone who is in the middle of nowhere? How do they do those things? And it's going to be different for every organisation.
You made a point earlier too, Simon, about hiring for fit, which is also comes into that a lot. I remember doing work with the rail network at one point, who completely changed the way that they hired train drivers, because they did all of this analysis about who thrives in that environment, and what kind of people are going to respond well to essentially sitting on their own for maybe 12 hours, not having any interaction with anybody, and geared all of their hiring policies more around introverted personality types. Okay, there's no point having I was talking to someone earlier, classic sales guy, Chris, I'll point you out. We were talking about the differences between us. Extrovert, Chris likes the being around people, the sales, the networking, etc. As much as I can stand up here and talk in front of you guys, I'm a secret introvert. I love to sit in my cave at home and do my project work of, dealing with veterinary suicide. So hiring for fit then becomes really, really important as well, of don't put an extrovert in the cave at home and don't put an introvert out networking every day.
When we look at those psychosocial factors, that is something that the regulators will start to get on. Why did you hire this person for that role? This person did not fit that role. So what's happening now for me is going to be a massive impact on all employers, because they're going to have to change a lot of what they're doing, starting with their hiring practices.
And we know that
We've just got a question here. Do you want to get the mic or?
Oh, we've got
Sam?
two, I think.
So if we have physical medicals before we employ someone, where are we at with a mental health check before we employ someone in a workplace to understand what you're saying there around their mental health space, extrovert, introvert, is there previous traumas, that sort of thing? Are we any closer to having something pre-employment before we hire someone?
Yeah, there's been a number of psychological tools used over time as predictors for hiring. Probably for me, depending on the role, some of the things we have to look at is tools that measure resilience. Everyone keeps talking about people need to be more resilient. I haven't seen a training program yet to make me more resilient. Resilience is generally built up over our life, the things we've gone through. So if someone has not had to be resilient, how do we expect them to be resilient all of a sudden? So yes, you're right. We need to looking at, and the tools will be there, psychological assessments that can pinpoint the factors you want about the job, whether it's introversion, extroversion, whether it's ability to concentrate for a long period of time, those sort of things. And in fact, we have a psychologist at a university here who might be able to give us a bit more information on that.
Yeah, I would just say that the thing you want to be cautious of there is that it's very easy to score high on some of these measures. We know what resilience is, broadly speaking. We know it's a good thing, so we want to score well on it if we're going into a job interview. So sometimes self-report can be useful. Sometimes you need more behavioural measures. And I think a good example of a behavioural measure, or one that I think of from undergrad psych, is you put 3-year-olds in a room and you put a marshmallow in front of them, and some of them are resilient enough or have enough strength in them to not just grab it and eat it immediately when the adult leaves the room. It's having behavioural measures of resilience which will get at that more accurately. I think there's a huge risk of bias in self-report and those sorts of constructs.
So that again changes how we recruit. So you see how what's happening now is not just an evolution in what the regulators are looking at, it's going to be an evolution in how we as businesses have to operate.
Something I'll add to that too that we have to be very careful about is the discriminatory nature of not hiring somebody because they have a disclosed mental health condition or they've got previous trauma and things like that. I feel like this will be a very talked about topic, once those tools kind of come to the forefront a bit more, that people probably won't want to disclose if they've had something. You can't test someone's brain to say that they've had a diagnosis in the past either, so it's quite difficult. So there's already a lot of stigma around disclosing whether you have had a mental health condition before, because you fear being judged, you fear being hired, you fear being promoted, et cetera, et cetera. So that, I think, is a real grey area. Psychometric testing, as Simon mentioned before, we do that at Aspect Group, but again, it's as good as what you do with the information. Most people do psychometric tests and they get it and they don't understand the results and they put it in the drawer and they just hire the person anyway. So again, it's what you do with the information. So being able to use that to help the person excel in their role. Going, Carly hates leadership, I'm not going to force her into a leadership role. She might want to be that person that's awesome at that role and just stay there forever. Because we need those people to be guns at the current role that they're doing rather than pushing them into leadership because they've been here for 15 years.
So it should be no different.
Sorry guys, there's a question out here actually. I saw a hand get raised up.
Hi, yes. This is a question in regards to the algorithms and the AI. You said there's a bias, and I was just wondering if the bias shows up after the results have been done, can you then put another pass through the computer to remove that bias, or perhaps even change some of the questions so that that bias is minimised?
Absolutely. So there's no guarantee that there will be bias, but there is, I think it's prudent to go with the assumption that there could be bias and look out for it in the algorithm. If you do identify it, it's a case of it's reflecting what's in the data, but you can make some adjustments to the algorithm to try and offset the biases that you find. So you can have safeguard mechanisms in place, but it's contingent on the person creating the algorithm to really think those things through in the planning stage. And so that's why with Simon and his team, and also with the stakeholders from our qualitative interviews, we've really tried to flesh out those concerns that people have about the sorts of measures that they fill out about their environment, so that we have that data to hand to help with that planning of the algorithm.
Is the bias removed? Can it be done without, like, through the computer system, rather than interviewing people again, or does it have to be both? Or so is it possible to just do a second pass and a third pass and keep those continuing without involving people again and spending that sort of money?
Once you have the data, you would be able to modify the model without having to bring people back to give you additional data points. Yeah.
Just, Alex, to go back to the...
Yeah, there's another question here, sorry, just over here. Just in the middle, probably Aaron's best to give the mic.
Am I on? Yeah. Lots of focus on the role of leaders, critical. We also know they're under significant duress. We know the data's telling us that. Great insights about the use of data as a capability, but I'm also wondering about our people and culture, health and safety, HR professionals. A lot of what we're chatting about now is quite complex and technical, and there's critical points when we can intervene. Really curious to hear your thoughts about where you see the capability of these central functions need to go.
Yeah. Do you want me to go? Or?
Go.
Yeah. Probably just one thing that I'll say about that to start off, or to kick off the conversation. Probably the biggest mistake that I would see with organisations that I work with when it comes to people and culture, HR, health and safety, etc., none of them talk. That's the number one thing that I see all the time. This organisation that I'm working with at the moment that is 30,000 large, so it is a huge organisation. They don't even know who the people and culture people are, and they're in health and safety and head of mental health. So, and that happens all the time. So they don't know what data they're all using, they don't know what measurements they're using, they don't know what interventions they've already got in place. And being able to work together and bring all of those functions under one is a really good place to start. And what you're doing there is bringing capability together. And when you're bringing capability together, that's when you've got so many great minds, ideas, etc., that has that capability uplift anyway, because you've got people learning and growing off each other. And you'd be surprised when you get that collective group together how much knowledge there is actually there. But I think being able to lean on external expertise as well to not only do the work for you, but to teach the people that you're working with as well. Like, I would hate for any organisation that I ever work with to, as much as money-wise it would be great, to need me forever. Okay, so you leaning on an external provider to begin with, but upskill your staff is really important. I like to walk away thinking they've got more knowledge than when I came. So yeah, they're just a couple of tips from me.
One of the other things, and I'll still, Jay says this all the time, is don't overcomplicate it. Your health and safety reps, your H&S people have been looking at hazards in the workplace. That's part of their role, and a lot of that is a conversation. Getting people together and having those conversations about what are they seeing, and that will be and should always be one of the first steps that goes on. All we're now doing is saying, okay, guys, start thinking beyond just the physical environment. Start thinking about the things that are impacting on the emotional and psychological well-being of our staff. And that's, I know that sounds oversimplistic, but it's a very good place to start. Yes, we need external expertise possibly in the beginning for people to understand how to deal with that. But no one knows your organisation better than you do. Even with what Carly does with her assessments, what Matt and I are talking about, we're getting data from you and your staff. We're not walking in and magically going, I know what's wrong with you, right? Because you and your staff will always know your organisation better than us.
I think the question itself is really important. I think the question, the way I interpreted the question was, we've got these people, what do we do with them? How do we upskill them? What are we expecting from these leaders and these people and culture professionals? And I think it's about upskilling everybody in the organisation to deal with the issues that you identify in the organisation. So you really need to identify what the issues are and then skill your people to deal with those issues as they're identified. It's very much a cart and horse scenario that we have, and it'd be nice to be able to go, this is our solution and this is what you need to do with all of your people. But it's not that cut and dry because everybody's issues are different and every organisation is different, and the impact of those different issues within those different organisations is going to be a challenge. But upskilling everyone and giving everybody the skills and having everybody support and manage effectively is the only way we're going to get through what the future holds for us. And it's not a future that is constructed by legislation, it's a future constructed by what's right as well. Legislation just follows what's right.
I would just add to, if it's possible, like it's not going to be possible for every organisation, but if it is, investing in a role that this is their focus as well. So just as we've got, work health and safety people, auditors, return to work coordinators, all of those different roles, think about your people and culture structure and your health and safety structure, and is it worthwhile us investing in a role that focuses on mental health and wellbeing or psychological health and safety? Because the future of the workplace suggests, yes, that would be a role that would be beneficial to invest in. And then be open-minded about the people that can fill that role. I never go to anything, and the first thing I actually always usually say is I'm not a psychologist, because I'm not a psychologist. But practically applying a lot of this knowledge through my work experience has allowed me to become an expert. Okay, but you see a lot of roles advertised saying you must be a psychologist registered with AHPRA, this and that. And a lot of psychologists, no offence if you are, I'm Matt, but a lot of psychologists don't know how to practically apply this stuff in a workplace setting. They've got really good clinical knowledge, but get them to deal with workplace mental health or psychological health and safety and they don't know where to start. Okay, so open your mind to what are the people and the skill sets that can actually fill these roles and benefit my workplace.
It's very tough to manage an environment when you've never been in that environment.
Correct.
And that's the issue. And we talk about, Carly said previously around not discriminating against people that may disclose an issue that we have. And we know that in many environments, in many organisations, and I know some in this room, lived experience is a very significant part of the capability to do the job, right? So we need to understand that, and we need to embrace that wherever possible. But if we're going to do that, we need to put some further protections around the processes.
Okay. So I'm just mindful of time, make sure everyone get on with their days. So we could probably talk about this
Forever.
sounds like all day, but I just want to thank Carly from Aspect Group, Andrew from FCW, and Matt Cumming as well from Deakin. If you have any questions on services that Aspect provide, any questions around Matt in terms of the data and the psych hazard tool that is currently being built, or any questions around Aegis and what we do, just grab one of us as you go.